Afternoon and welcome everybody to the first webinar about science communication. Specifically, today we will inaugurate our science communication series by talking about science divulgation in the audiovisual media. And first of all, I would like to thank our four wonderful speakers on behalf of the whole club of scientists for accepting our invitation and kindly sharing their time with us this afternoon at this moment. And before starting, I would like to take a couple of minutes to just put some context on what the Club of Scientists is and what we are going to do here today. And basically, the Rafael del Pino Club of Scientists was born in the Rafael del Pino Alumni Association, where some scholars with scientific backgrounds just gathered together to talk and discuss different topics in science. And well, soon we realized that apart from our scientific background, we shared some common principles, some values, and that many other people around us who weren't specifically within this alumni association also shared this interest. And that is why, with the support of the Rafael del Pino Foundation, which is the foundation that gave us the scholarships to study abroad, and well, all the scholars within the association have that scholarship. With their help, we decided to open our club to all scientists that were interested in joining this kind of events. Today, our community has grown exponentially, and I can say that in less than 1 year, we are almost 1,000 scientists in the Club of Scientists, and we maintain this community active and alive by organizing monthly events such as the one that we have here today. With all this, what we aim is to create a community of interdisciplinary scientists who are experts in different areas of knowledge and that also share other common interests outside the lab, such as, for example, innovation, technology transfer, science policy, science communication, etc. So, well, being that said, I recommend you all to sign up for our newsletter if you haven't done it yet, so that you can be updated about the next activities and events that we organize. And after this brief recap, we can proceed to start this webinar. And I just want to mention that if you have any questions, you can write them in the chat. And then at the end, we will discuss them if we have time. So I hope that you enjoy today's session. And for starting, I would like to call Helena Rodriguez, the main responsible of this science communication series, to take the lead of the session from now on. Thank you all for attending, and thank you, Helena, and all the panelists for being here today.
Thank you very much, Marina. So good afternoon or morning or evening, depends on where you're seeing us today. It's a pleasure to have you all with us for our first discussion panel on science communication. Today, we're going to focus on the exciting approach of using audiovisual media to divulgate science. We will start with a discussion on some subtopics, and I will pick up any questions at the end. But please, as Marina has said, the Q&A chat will be open through the bell, so write down any question as soon as it comes to your mind, and we will take them up later. So, with no more hesitation, we have the pleasure to come with four renowned scientists with plenty of experience on this topic. We welcome Professor Donna Nelson from the University of Oklahoma, USA. She was the science consultant of the acclaimed TV series Breaking Bad. Professor Eduardo Sáenz de Cabezón y Garay from the University of La Rioja, Spain, and he's the host of the popular Spanish night show Orbita Laica. Dr. Shannon Odell from Brooklyn, USA. She's the co-host of the podcast The Science of Self-Care. And finally, Dr. Ines Dawson from Singapore. She's the creator of the award-winning YouTube channel Through Curiosity. So let's start with a brief introduction from each of our panelists about their career as science communication. Donna, would you like to start?
Sure. So, we are each sort of composed of our different backgrounds. And so let me give you a little bit of my background. So I've had different interests, which were in some cases very large. And they seem to get larger and larger, encompassing more and more people as I went along. So the first thing I did that encompassed a lot of people was the Nelson Diversity Surveys. Those are available in a Wikipedia page, but I'll just say that we looked at the representation of women and minorities by race, by rank, and by gender among top research universities in the United States. The next thing that I did that was very outwardly facing was science advisor for Breaking Bad. And so I did all sorts of things with them. I mean, just almost you name it, I did it. And the third thing that I did was I ran for and won president of the American Chemical Society, which took me to many, many, many different countries representing the American Chemical Society, the world's largest scientific organization. At that time, it was about 170,000 members, which was an experience in itself, trying to make that many people happy. I tried, and it was a great learning experience. Each of these have been fabulous learning experiences. And so I think I'll wait and see what questions there are, if people, what they want to know. But let me just give you my email address in case anybody wants to contact me afterwards. But my email address is really easy to find online also. I've intentionally made it very accessible. So I think rather than take up more of your time, I'll wait and see what people are interested in.
Let's move to Shannon.
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here and to speak with you all. It was very exciting to get the invitation. So I am based in New York City. I came to New York originally pre my PhD program to work in a lab right out of college as a lab tech. And while I was doing that, I started taking comedy classes. So I started taking improv classes at a theater called the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater, which is a theater started by Amy Poehler and friends here in New York City. It's one of the few comedy theaters we have that kind of teaches the art of comedy. So I started doing that and really loving it. Eventually, I kind of transitioned into grad school. I was really loving research, and I said, okay, let's get a PhD in neuroscience. I started my program at Weill Cornell Medicine. And at that point in my comedy career, I was doing improv, but I also kind of wanted to do every form of comedy there was. So I started doing stand-up. I was doing sketch, kind of spending my evenings doing comedy. During the day, I would be in the lab. Some nights I had to be in the lab too, but always tried to make space for comedy. And at this point, I kind of kept them separate. I didn't really think about combining them until a friend approached me and was like, I really want to create a live show that has science and like a live comedy show that involves science. And it was like kind of a light bulb moment for me where I never even thought about combining the two things. And from that, we created the live show Drunk Science. So Drunk Science is a live show that we've been doing for 6 or 7 years here in New York City. The basic premise is 3 comedians present a scientific dissertation to a panel of real scientists. So we invite a scientist on, ahead of their field, and then we invite comedians on to give a scientific dissertation based on a topic we give them. It's a lot of fun. It's really just what it is a casual way to talk about science. You have comedians on taking their best guess of what's going on. You have the scientists there to correct them. It's a really great thing. We kind of immediately found success with that. The first show was sold out, and I was like, wow, I guess this science comedy thing might have some legs. And from that, I was doing Drunk Science. I started combining science in my stand-up. I would kind of do some kind of TED Talk-esque stand-up shows where I would be talking about science, but then I would infuse it with jokes kind of in my style of comedy. Then I was approached by the video production team at a media company called Inverse, where it's a science media company, and they were like, hey, you do a lot of science comedy. Let's do a one-off video called, what happens on your brain when you're drinking alcohol, and we'll have you drinking while we do the video, which was a really fun concept. And again, it was one of those things where it found success, overnight. It had 1 million views. It kind of, in the end had like 30 million views, something crazy like that, which allowed us to continue the series. I ended up getting to do 2 seasons of that. We didn't only do alcohol. We covered a lot of different topics. It was called Your Brain on Blank. We looked at puppies. We did Your Brain on conspiracy theories, a whole host of different things. Then eventually I started my podcast, which I do now, which is called The Science of Self-Care, which is a podcast I host with 2 comedians. Again, there's a theme in my life. I do things with comedians, and I'm always the scientist on board. And in that podcast, we break down different self-care topics and talk about, you know, our own relationship with that topic, and also what the science research behind that topic is, and also kind of just the science research of self-care, things like the placebo effect, all those things that we love to talk about, which is a lot of fun. I talked a lot about, you know, my successes here, but with that, in any creative field, including science communication, there were a lot of failures. So I'd be happy to talk about those as well. Yeah, so excited to be here, and I'm excited to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. Let's go to the only man in the group, Eduardo.
Hello, I'm very happy to be here. And as Donna and Shannon, I also like to drink and make people happy. So, and do it with science. I'm a mathematician. Work in Spain at the University of La Rioja. I'm from La Rioja. And how did I start with science communication? I never had the slightest intention to make a career in science communication. I still don't have, but things happen. So I was a storyteller before I was a mathematician. I was telling stories in theaters, in pubs, in bars, and villages all around. But then I became a mathematician, and I put together both things because someone in my university told me there was this science monologue or science stand-up contest called FameLab. So I took part of this. It was the first year that was run in Spain, and I took part of that, and I loved it. So I said, oh, that's great to do stand-up with science. So I spoke with the other finalists, and we made up this group called the Big Van, Scientists on the Road, we call Big Van, with van like a van, the thing like a car. And we started a science comedy show, a stand-up show that was extremely successful. We were performing all around the Spanish-speaking world, so all around Spain and South America and the Americas and Morocco and, well, many places. So that was very, very successful. We still continue with that. That was a surprise for us, really. But these things are still happening. So then later on, I was called to do a TED talk, a TEDx talk in Buenos Aires. And I don't know why someone in the TED webpage liked this talk, and it was uploaded to the actual TED webpage together with a talk by Bill Gates. So that made my mother very proud.
Yeah.
And so my mother asked, "Who's that guy with you there in the webpage?" So I still have this picture of that. So that was very successful as well. I didn't know about TED Talks and so on, but well, I happened to be there. And then after that talk, I got some calls to do a YouTube channel, so I'm doing it. It's called Derivando, and so it's about math, about the culture of math. So math from a cultural perspective. I like that. I want to join different things. Then I started also, I was called to write some books. I wrote 3 books so far, or 4, I don't know. And I did some collaborations with radio and television. And now I'm conducting a TV show at the Spanish National Television. So this is what I do for science communication. So my science communication activities. But my main activity is really research. And don't tell anyone in the TV or so, but this is the thing I love most. If I have to choose, I will choose research. That's clear to me. But I love doing all this science communication stuff.
Thank you very much. Let's go with the last one.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. I really appreciate the invitation. I feel like my story has a few elements that are in common with other people on this panel. I feel like ever since I was a young kid, if you were to ask me what I wanted to do, I pretty much would always say I wanted to study insects because I thought insects were the coolest organisms, and I maintain that they're the coolest organisms. They are most of organisms, so there's a high chance the coolest one would be amongst the insects. And then I also said that I wanted to work making documentaries because I hated the idea that people use the documentary channel in Spain to fall asleep. So I wanted to make interesting documentaries that people would actually sit and watch. So I pursued my first passion in higher education. I studied biological sciences at Oxford and then stayed on to do a PhD on the biomechanics of insect flight. Whilst doing that, I was working with cameras and insects and lasers by day, and then by night, I decided to continue to work with cameras and insects, but instead of actually researching them, I wanted to make videos explaining basically things that I find particularly interesting, but that are simultaneously very obscure. And to just show, the kinds of things that you can discover through research, and that papers that might have been expressed in manners that are very complicated and may seem boring actually have very interesting findings. So I try to sum it up as Draw Curiosity, which is the name of my YouTube channel, is basically things you didn't know you wanted to know. It's characterized by being obscure, it tries to link different disciplines together and hopefully answers some questions that maybe you've had at some point or maybe you haven't, but either way, you'll leave with some new fact to go to the pub. Now, since then, I've graduated from my PhD and have made this my full-time job. So YouTube is primarily my portfolio and basically where I get to do everything, where I get to have the joy of scripting, collaborating with people, learning how to film, set up, edit, animate, and promote. But I'm also the host of the Future Talk podcast with Merck, and I've also collaborated on other punctual projects here and there, both in Spanish and in English media. Since then, I've kind of globe hopped a little bit. So I moved to Malaysia for a year and I'm producing a multi-part series on mangroves. I'm currently in Singapore, not intentionally, but more as a side product of coronavirus, and I will be moving to the US soon. So I'm hoping to continue my collaborations with other researchers when I reach there.
That's amazing. I couldn't find a mute button. That's why it's taking long. So you all have a lot of experience, right? You've all used TV shows, YouTube, podcasts, live performance such as FameLab and TED Talks, as you've said, to communicate science. But what I'd like to know is, what do you like most of the medias you've used, their benefits, but also what are their downsides of them? Does anyone want to volunteer to that? There you go, Donna. You're muted.
Okay, so so one of the advantages that, and one of the reasons that I was very enthusiastic about being the science advisor for Breaking Bad is because I think I thought it might be an opportunity to try to improve the quality of science that was presented to the public. Because we all know, there have been many, many, many instances in which just the science that was presented to the public was really just garbage, just absurd and, subject to ridicule. And then, the image of scientists portrayed was just, shall we say, strange, not real. And so I thought, well, this will be a wonderful opportunity to try to improve that. One of the downsides is that and I think I'm not criticizing them. I think this is absolutely normal and required, but they have to be constantly thinking about the bottom line, getting picked up next season. And so there are instances in which reality can conflict with the need to have a plot device to move the plot forward and make it very popular with their viewers. So I'll give you an example of one. When I was on set, Vince Gilligan came to me and said, "What do you think about making the meth blue?" And as you know, in Breaking Bad, the meth was colored blue. And I told him I wouldn't do it. And he said, "Why not?" And I said, "Because meth is white." And of course, he had gone on and on and on about how he wanted it to be realistic. And he said, "Well, isn't there any reason why it might be blue?" And I said, "No, meth is white." And he said, "Well, what if it's really pure?" And I said, "Then it will be white." And he said, "Well, what if it's really, really, really pure?" And I said, "Then it'll be really, really, really white." And so, as you know, he went right ahead and made it blue. But that did not bother me because I realized they needed a plot device and they needed to get picked up next season. Their big requirement was to be popular with their audience. And so you have to keep that in mind constantly when you're a science advisor. You can't expect them to take every single piece of advice that you give them. You have to align your goals with their goals, which is the show needs to get picked up next season.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, you don't.
Sure, I'll make my answer quick. I feel like the two big, big medias I have experience with are YouTube and TV. So I just thought I would break down very quickly what I perhaps like and have more qualms about each one. Obviously, I'm very biased because I am a YouTuber, and I think everyone who does YouTube and consumes YouTube appreciates the individualistic and kind of grassroots feel to it. It's basically someone putting their ideas or their way of analyzing the world outside, which contrasts to TV, where usually you're working with a very big team of people, which is often quite nice. It's nice to take the load off and you just have your single job, which is delivering your lines on science or doing the experiment or writing the script, whichever part is assigned to you. But it also means that you're paying a lot of people to carry out a big production, ergo you also need a lot of eyeballs to want to watch what you're making. And this often leads to not having much creative control of what is being made, or things being made to be, as Donna said, for the generic appeal or to have grabbing plot devices. So for those who might be a little bit pickier, there will be many times when working with TV where you might feel like some of the more specific or different things that you want to do aren't possible. Whereas with YouTube, sure, perhaps you might not reach as large an audience, although actually there are YouTubers who do pull in millions of views, and I would argue are just as popular, if not more so, than TV programs, and especially with the younger generations. But I would say with YouTube, precisely because you're making everything, then you have the gift of actually being able to choose what you make. And I think for myself, I personally have grown to really like being able to be my own boss and actually decide what I get to showcase and talk about. And I really enjoy that people will often watch my videos expecting it to be about something they already know, and they'll always say they've learned something different, or they've learned something they weren't expecting to understand or that they wouldn't have found anywhere else. Thank you.
Okay. So I would like to say two things about the things that I love most in terms of the media and so on. One is the variety. I do lots of different things. So YouTube or live shows or TV, radio, all this stuff. And this means you have to learn which audience, which public you want to address to, and to know them and know people. So try to know how people are related to science or how they will react to what you do. That's very difficult, but very amusing experience, and that's one of the highest points. Also, you have to learn very different languages, and you have to speak different languages, different ways to write, different ways to do things. It's not the same to do a video for YouTube than a book or a lecture or whatever. And also the technicalities are very important. For instance, in television, everything is so precise, so measured. You have to do lots of repetitions, lots of those things. And you learn a lot about that. And you learn a lot about science first, because when you try to express science in different ways, in different languages, you learn more about your own science, about your own understanding of science. And that's one of the biggest things, one of the biggest advantage for me as a scientist, not only as a communicator. As a scientist, I think this is a very good. And also about yourself, how you behave, who are you on stage? And who are you when you talk about in front of other people? Or who you pretend to be? And this is always a life path, a life path. Something you're learning your whole life. And I think that when you do a variety of things, you learn a lot about yourself. Among all the things that I do, what I prefer is clearly to perform on stage. And that's because you speak of what you love in a degree of intimacy with the people you speak in it that is not in any other media. That was something I missed when I started TV. That was frightening me. But I think I overcame that, and it doesn't mean that there's less people or more people. I remember my TED talk in Buenos Aires. It was 10,000 people in front of me. It was like in a stadium, and everything was so well prepared. The sound was so good, the image was so good that we really got an intimacy, and that feeling of how to say what it means to be human and the power of the nude word. Just words. Just a voice, something that comes out your mouth and is bringing 10,000 people together around the one idea. On the other side, I performed for 5-7 people in a small room in a hotel, kind of modern stuff and so on. And that's also a different kind of intimacy. And finally, the downside is probably misunderstandings. When people don't understand you or you don't understand yourself. And the bad thing is not that misunderstandings exist. The bad thing is when you don't learn from misunderstandings. Misunderstandings are okay. I mean, that's an opportunity to learn about science again and about yourself.
Yeah, I am finding so much inspiration from everything that everyone else is saying. I think it really speaks to me, the idea of knowing your audience, what you were just talking about. I think with any project, SciComm project that you start, you really need to think about who are you trying to reach, because that's going to change, how you talk about things, how in depth you go, what your angle is. Like if your audience is a general audience, what is the age range that you're trying to hit? If your audience is scientists, but maybe people who aren't specialized in that field, that'll be different. Versus if your audience is people who are specialists in the field, that'll really change how you present the science. And I think in the same way, how you present your science, finding your voice in science communication can be quite the learning process. I mean, now what is so great about science communication is that we have so many science communicators, and we can see people who are being very successful in it. And I think sometimes it's the same thing with comedy, actually. You can get caught up in feeling like, I need to be like this type of comedian. I need to be this type of science communicator. I need to talk like this. This needs to be how I relate to the material. And I think what's really important is finding your own voice in science communication, because that's going to come across in any medium that you work in, that you're being true to how you relate to the science. And that's kind of the value that you bring as a science communicator, especially because I believe everyone here are scientists. So you have your own unique relationship to science, which is so special. You've spent years learning about it and finding ways that you connect to the science, and being able to share that with people is really, really special. And I think also the idea of being able to make mistakes, I think, is a valuable lesson. Being a scientist, I think we think about, okay, if I'm going to give a scientific talk, I'm pretty much going to like maybe script it out. I know how I talk about my topic. I know the language I use. I know the precision I use. And when you're a science communicator, often you're talking on a large variety of topics, not just, you know, what you defend or what you research. So I think being a little bit flexible with yourself, that of course you're going to research things as well as you can, and you're going to ask expert, make sure, double check that you're doing well, but you're going to make mistakes if you continue to do science communication. So I think it's okay, and the idea of owning up to your mistakes as a science communicator is what makes a good science communicator, being like, whoops, I kind of fumbled that. Thanks for the input. And and being able to correct yourself, you know. We're as scientists and as science communicators, we're often looked at as experts, which is great, but even experts sometimes, you know, miss every once in a while, and that's okay, we're human. But in terms of which medium I like the most, I think each of them have their own, special kind of use. Like, for example, I'm working in podcasts right now, which is really great, has been really easy to do in the pandemic, right? Because all you need is a microphone. You can zoom in with your co-hosts. You need someone who can edit and clean up the files and such. But how the podcast a lot of podcasts work is if it's, you know, ours is partially scripted in that, like, I kind of script out my science takes, but it's conversational. So in that way, it can be a lot, you know, more relaxed. It can be longer. It doesn't have to be as, you know, precise. And I love that about podcasts. I love that we can all just kind of chime in and say how we're feeling about what we're talking about. Whereas, like, you know, in the video field, you're going to have to really precisely script.
I'm really sorry, problems of the direct.
That's okay. You'll have to more, maybe with video, since everything is a little bit more expensive, say, like, it depends. If you're making your own video, that's different. But if you're working with a production team, you know, you maybe have one day. So you have scripts, you have set lists or shoot lists. Everything's a little bit more precise, a little bit more expensive. I personally love video, and because I also love working in video with a team. Sometimes it can feel a little bit lonely doing video on your own, and I really like working with a director and working with a producer and like brainstorming of like how, and with video you can have animation, you can explain things more simply because you have that visual aid with you. So yeah, I think it's a complicated question. Right now I'm really loving podcasts. I of course love the live show. Being a comedian, there's nothing like feeling the energy of the audience and getting to respond, you know, getting to hear their responses live and having to adjust how you behave based on their responses is really thrilling. But yeah, I just spoke a lot about a lot of different things. Hopefully that covered the question.
I would just like to comment on some of the points that have been made and perhaps take them a little bit further. Everyone has already touched on these things, but one extremely important thing, which this event that we're involved in right now shows, is that science cuts across boundaries and borders. You know, we were just talking earlier among ourselves, among the speakers, about how we're all located. We represent so many different continents. I mean, just this event is cutting across borders and boundaries. And that is what science does. We all speak the same scientific language. You know, we value peer review. We respect the scientific method. And so we all have these things in common. It really brings us together. And so I think that's one of the things that is very important, regardless of which technique you use. This brings us all together. And I think it helps educate also. So, for example, when I was I mentioned that when I was president of American Chemical Society, I spoke in so many different countries. I mean, I traveled a lot. But, you know, when I was doing my advising for Breaking Bad and I would go do a set visit, I felt like I was in a different country there because people would come up and it was clear to me that they just didn't, they had these strange ideas about what scientists were. And I got asked by the writers, by the cast, by the crew, they would say, but you're not a scientist. And I would say, yes, I'm a scientist. I had to say that so many times. Finally, I just said, I'm a tenured professor of organic chemistry. I assure you, I am a scientist. But they just had strange ideas of what a scientist is. And so all of these methods, all of your activities will help dispel that. This is what is really needed across the globe. And it builds bridges, it builds friendships. Things like even just this event are so important because of that.
Thank you very much. That's all been great input. I mean, we've touched a lot of topics, including the one I wanted to go next. That's basically what you have to take into consideration when you go into be a scientist communicator. But I was just wondering, could you just give us a bit of touch of what are your routine? How do you prepare for when you're doing one of your podcasts or the night show? You have any kind of like, I'm going to practice in front of the mirror, I'm going to write a script and I have to touch this point. Any advice or any hints or any habits?
I can talk to this in terms of podcasts. So how we do our podcast, it's like I said, conversational, but each episode we cover a topic. So we kind of have a brainstorm list of all the different topics that we, want to do in the future. And we always ask our listeners for topics as well to see what they want to cover. So that's part of it. It's just the pitch, almost like the pitch list of like, you need to have that at the beginning of any project that's going to be multi-episode, because it's crazy how exhausting that process gets of just like trying to think of a new episode idea. So I would always really say, like, make a huge list of like any kind of idea you have, so you have it there and that you can pull from in times where you're feeling a little mentally exhausted. Second, once I have the topic, I kind of do a like large review. I'll just like, plug that topic into PubMed, see if there's any reviews on it, kind of get myself acquainted with the topic at hand. And that includes, looking in popular media, like stuff like, did The Atlantic, does Times have an article on this? Kind of like the New York Times or something like that, have kind of a popular media take on it or on the science of it. Kind of grabbing as much information as I can and kind of making a master document of all the interesting aspects that maybe I'll want to cover. And then I go as far, even though the podcast is conversational, I pretty much script myself out, where I bullet point every kind of thing I want to talk about to make sure I have it there to refer to when I'm talking about the podcast. And that, includes, simple things, because like I won't remember numbers. I don't have that kind of mind, what percent increase, things like that. I need to write that down. But also just like little talking points, interesting things that I make sure I really want to touch upon. So yeah, I think there's more preparation than you think with especially science media that seems so like conversational, or like even live shows where everyone's talking. It's like there's a lot of work that goes into it, and I find being more prepared is always better.
Absolutely.
Okay, one thing I do is every morning, first thing I do when I wake up is repeat to myself a mantra, which is on top of the hierarchy is the content, is the science. On the center of the focus is the audience. And it's not the other way around. It's not the other way around. So first thing is, on top of the hierarchy is the content. So I study a lot. I have to master the topic. Absolutely. That's what I want to share with you. But in the center of the focus is the audience. It's not me. And it's not the content as well. It's not the knowledge. It's the audience. And I remember a metaphor that Malcolm Love told me once. Assume I want to invite Helena to have a wine. My region is a wine region. So assume we go to dinner and I want to offer you a wine. and I select a beautiful wine, an excellent wine, and invite you to a nice dinner in a nice restaurant. And then you have your glass, and I pour the whole bottle of wine into your glass. I will ruin your dress, the dinner, the wine, everything. I know a lot about the topic, but if you want to pour everything in a little glass, then I will ruin everything. And that's putting the science, the content, in the center of the focus. In the center of the focus is you who are listening to me. And I need to learn a lot about you. And then, only then, I will be able to address to you. And then, to doing that, I'm a freak of structure. The structure of the writing or the video, whatever. I come from the storytelling world, and I learn a lot of structures in the folk stories. They are what has been building humanity for thousands of years. So learn about them. I think the structures in the storytelling is still alive and still valid and will be forever, probably.
Okay, so why don't we move to the next point? So we have a big audience here. We have scientists, we have people from the audiovisual media. What if they want to start as science communicators? What would be a good way for them to get involved, to just go into podcasting series, or even to try to start doing consulting?
I'm going to make the small assumption that most people asking this question might be grad students. So some of my suggestions might be more specific to academics, but I think a lot of these are still accessible to people who might not be in academia. A lot of people here have done FameLab, which I think is an excellent way to dip your toes in the water. Most universities have a local heat, and you can just see how do you can you come up with a story that you can talk about in 3 minutes? Do you enjoy the process of turning facts into an interesting story? Do you enjoy presenting it to people? Is that process enjoyable? That's actually how I started. I originally started giving talks, and then I moved more to YouTube because I liked the idea of tinkering around with technology and visuals as well. I also think maybe being a guest on someone else's show can give you a low commitment way of dipping your toes in the water. Do you enjoy what you see about the preparation and production aspect? And additionally, I would also say that as far as things go, the entry level to get started, pretty much anyone, if they want to, can start making videos or podcasts. They can speak to their friends and colleagues who might be working in science. So it's more about finding the format that you might enjoy. And also just keeping an eye out for maybe competitions or opportunities. I also think are ways of putting your work out there for other people to potentially see. I would also say Twitter is a great way to connect both with the academic and the SciComm community. And there's also a wonderful network of educational YouTubers, both Spanish networks and English-speaking networks as well. So I strongly recommend exploring all of those options.
I can give a brief response. While I was working with Breaking Bad, I didn't do these things personally, but I had many people contact me and say, I'm starting a science blog, or I'm starting this or that. Would you give me a quotation to help drive traffic to my site? Or would you be willing to help me, by appearing on one of my first shows or something like this? And I always said yes. I mean, I think it's very important to help the people who are starting out, because these things are very important. So that's all I was going to say.
I would say for those people who are trying to start a career in science communication, I would say, don't do it. We are already there. So what are you doing? You're going to take us apart? No, don't do it. So we are already doing it. Why would you? And then now that's the question. Why would you? Why would you? Why would you do that? Once you have an answer to that question, then you start. First, think about that. why would I start this if there's already some people doing it? Why would I, me, myself, start? Then once you have an answer, then start. And in my personal experience, the best thing or the thing I think I'm good at is have a good reception of what life brings. I'm honest when I said I have no intentions to do a career, but I received things as they came, and I think then how can you do it? Do that first. Identify what opportunities are coming. Identify things. Be aware of what's happening. Be brave or unconscious or both. Maybe they're very similar. Be ready to work a lot. Be ready to work a lot on that. And don't give too much room to keep yourself saying how tragic and hard life is. It is, but don't give too much room for that. Or how important you are, or what you are doing is. Don't give too much room to that. Of course, it's important what you're doing, but don't be too much aware of that. And now that you're ready to receive what life brings, may put yourself whenever there is something happening. And then life will bring you things. If you're always sitting at the same time waiting, then probably life will bring nothing and you won't react.
I think those are some great advice from all of you. Well, Eduardo, you've touched the thing that it's going to be a lot of work. And actually, many of you actually do multiple things at a time. So I was just wondering, how do you manage all of that while you prepare to do all this communication through the audiovisual media? Especially in some of the questions we got pre the events, people were saying, like, how do you do that while you have a research career? Anyone about you want to tip in?
I could say, so I started all this while I was in grad school, and it's definitely I think if you want to be in science communication, you have to really, really want to be in it, especially as a research scientist or someone who's doing something else full time, because it is a lot of work. It's a lot of you're working nights, you're working anytime you're running an incubation, and you're scripting while you're running an incubation. A lot of finding those little pockets of time where you can. I would say to start out, there's so much production work in audiovisual science communication, right? There's so much if you want to start a channel or start a podcast, that involves producing it, which includes not only scripting it but also running a camera, editing, things like that, which can be a lot of work, especially if you don't know it to start off. So I would say to start off, maybe find collaborators if you can, until you get more comfortable at things. Finding collaborators is so important. Also, just to learn from their experience, especially if someone's a little bit more experienced than you. That was so important for me to find collaborators in my video project, because they could, I didn't, for Your Brain on Blank, I didn't have to produce it. I just wrote and hosted it, which it would have been impossible, I think, for me to produce and edit that series, during that time. So yeah, find collaborators is my main piece of advice.
Well, I think it depends a lot on what you do in science. For me, as a mathematician, I can work on a plane. I can work on the bus. I can work on the train. And I don't have experiments running. So that's an advantage for being a mathematician, that you can work everywhere. But I need to, my advice for this is very short, is focus. Focus on what you do at every moment. So it's the only way you can do science, probably, and it's the only way you can really take advantage of your time in any of the activities. And if you are going to do several activities, then when you're doing something, you need to be doing something.
Ines?
My answer might be a little different, but I feel I'm also someone who started during grad school, during my PhD. And I felt like I was working nonstop, but it was almost a feeling of kind of working hard and playing hard. So as long as I did my day job really well, then I could spend the rest of my time doing as many other things as possible. And what I've discovered about myself is that I do burn out quite easily this way, and that I thrive both doing tons of things. I'm either doing tons of things at once or doing nothing and recovering all that energy to get started again. So I don't know, there are many times where I look back and I wonder how was I managing to do so many things at the same time. But then I take a look and realize I'm still doing lots of things currently, just maybe I have diversified a little in what I spend time on. So I think, to echo Shannon, pretty much as long as what you're spending your passionate time on is things that you're passionate about, it will come easily. And actually what I think is more important is to learn to not overwork yourself or accidentally burn yourself out from trying to do too much, because in the long run it might not be sustainable. And to do as many things as you can that actually feed your soul or that are aligned with your values. So I do find myself saying no to more things now so that I get to focus on things that I care about more.
That's amazing. So moving to the last year of the discussion panel. So you all have worked with professionals in the audiovisual media. As you were saying, we kind of speak a bit of a different language. They sometimes don't even realize that we are scientists. So I was wondering, what's the best way of adapting that language? And actually one of the questions we got on the registration were some artists specifically asking what they could gain from scientists. So you could just basically like maybe elaborate what you know some professionals have actually gained, or any like small story of they say like, oh, I didn't know that, or this was great, or.
Well, anytime that you start a new activity across borders or across boundaries or whatever, it's going to, by definition, be very more creative, because you're working in a place frequently where no one has ever worked before. And so you're going to see an exchange of ideas that hasn't been done before. That's been my experience.
Yeah, I would say that really interestingly with Drunk Science, I think at first we were like, oh no, our comedian's gonna absolutely hate this. We basically invite the comedians to the show, and then we say, here's a list of topics that you have to do a 10-minute set on, right? And they're all like, they're scientific topics. So we'll have, a theoretical physicist on, and it's like, okay, here's a theoretical physics topic that you have to do a 10-minute set on. And what we found is that our comedians have loved the show, and the idea that has stretched them to kind of, sometimes their research is as small as they read the Wikipedia page, but with that, they're able to come up with ideas and analogies and things like that, and jokes that they, haven't really thought about ever doing before. And, some of them have incorporated, jokes like that into their sets. Some of them it's just for the moment. But I think there's a real value to, combining science with art, and it can be really unexpected. And my big thing, with comedy and science and why it's similar, it's like comedy kind of, when it's at its best, shows the absurdity of the human form and absurdity of life. And kind of science does too. Science is kind of the story of who we are and our life and our earth, and, why things happen the way they do. And so it's kind of, I think comedy and science go hand in hand. So I think a lot of different art forms also do that, explain the human experience and our thoughts in the world. So why not put some science in there?
I always find it very interesting adapting different stories to different situations. I feel science is very straightforward and kind of very rigid in how it's often presented. You've got your abstract, then you've got introduction, your methods, results, discussion, conclusions. as a scientist, you know exactly where to go in the paper to find everything. It's all highly, very, very specific. You probably miss out half of the paper. It's probably very boring and excessively specific to anyone else outside of the tiny bubble of the paper. Then you take the press release, and it's pretty much the opposite. You start with the conclusion first, and then you start to tie to the most basic bits of information so that even if the reader gets bored early, they are hopefully leaving with accurate information and as soon as possible. And then as a science communicator or an entertainer, you're sort of balancing both lines. You're trying to learn how to tell a story. You have to kind of master the art of knowing how well you can keep someone's attention to tell a story, and figure out the balance between letting out facts slowly, but still, you know, putting amusing or entertaining bits or important pieces of factoids at appropriate points, and also hopefully not present the information in such a way that if someone were to leave halfway through, they're not accidentally leaving with the incorrect message. So I think it's more about learning the psychology of the viewer and what sort of thing grips attention, things like comedy or maybe just being a really good storyteller, knowing how to use plot devices. All of those things are very important. And then in terms of collaborating with artists, I actually feel like artists and scientists should collaborate a lot more often. I think scientists, sure, we can provide highly specific information. We can act as consultants. We can inform, oh, your insect has 8 legs, but actually insects have 6 legs, or there should be this many segments. But also the artist also knows what's trying to be communicated, what is and isn't important. And they're a lot better at presenting that information visually so that a third person who's neither a scientist nor an artist, upon seeing it, just subconsciously focuses on whatever is important about what is trying to be communicated. So I think having that open way discussion and bearing in mind both the facts that actually matter, as Edu said earlier, you're not trying to pour a whole bottle of wine into a tiny glass, but what parts matter, and also what is the psychology of your audience.
In my experience, I live with artists. I'm surrounded by artists. All my best friends, etc., are artists. So I'm used to speak with them, and most of the time in the conversation, the sentence appear, oh, this is like in math. Oh, that's like in theater. Oh, that's like in music. There's lots of things that come together. And I think historically, and it's still true, artists are very good at posing the big questions, better than scientists, much better than scientists. In fact, I think historically, I mean, Leonardo was the first to think about we can understand the world as a machine before Galileo. He was the one who invented really this scientific thing, and he was an artist. And it's still true, The artists pose the big questions, and scientists find a way, a very precise way, to answer in some sense those big questions. So that's when dialogue can be held. Also, when we come to artists and humor and science, I think something that they have in common, and I use it a lot, is that science, art, and humor are based on connecting things that were not supposed to be connected. And that when big science comes, that when good jokes come, and when good artistic pieces come. So connecting things that were not supposed to be connected. And then there was something that Ines said, and it's very, very true. We as scientists, we have a different relation between showing and explaining. An artist shows and then explains. A scientist explains and then we show. And if you're doing a show, work like an artist. First show, let the audience make their own picture and then explain, and everything will make sense. In a scientific paper, you explain, they show an example or whatever, an experiment. It's the other way around. But it's not a hard thing to do, I think.
I'd like to make a comment on some of the things that were said. I also believe it's extremely important to, the way I think of it is, have respect for the people you're working with, like the writers. when they would when the Breaking Bad writers would send me the scripts to review, I would go through it with a minimalistic attitude. I would change as few words as possible and make the science correct, because I had great respect for the writers. I knew they knew how to write and make the show a hit, and I did not. And so I would change as little as possible, and I would try to keep any alliteration in there. Like if they had a 3-syllable word that started with a P, I would try to think of a 3-syllable word that started with a P. You know, if I needed to change it, I would try to think of a 3-syllable word that started with a P to change it to, so that I could make it correct, you know, and try to keep the cadence and the alliteration in place. And also, as far as how much time it takes, like with the Breaking Bad, I was just on call. They would contact me when they needed something, but I always had it in my mind that they needed it immediately. And they weren't going to wait around for some ditzy chemistry professor to wait 2 weeks to get back with them, because they were on a timeline. You know, they were filming. And I knew that if I didn't get back with them, I would lose my opportunity to influence what they were doing. And so that didn't take too much of my time, I feel, although occasionally I'd stay up all night looking up what they were wanting. But with the American Chemical Society, I had to take a 3-year absence in order to serve as president-elect, president, and past president, because it consumed your time 100%. I couldn't teach, or everything else had to stop, but it was worth it.
That's amazing. So last question of the discussion panel, let's talk about the future. What is the future of using audiovisual media for science communication? What do you think are going to be the new trend, or what can come forward? And specifically, we have a question for the audience about, what about TikTok? Could that be used?
I'm too old for that. For thinking about the future. No, I mean, I like podcasts, as Shannon said. I think that's a lot of things to do there. And I like there's a famous YouTuber in Spain, Jaime Altozano, who speaks of music. And I was shocked by something he said in a YouTube meeting. And he said, YouTube is empty. And I was shocked. I think, is that true? And then I started realizing how many Spanish-speaking channels on mathematics are there. There are not mathematics lectures, which are mathematics schools. How many of them are there? Maybe 2? How many channels on the... So it's really true. I mean, science communication is to some extent empty. So there's lots of opportunities. So I think the future, maybe TikTok is one. The people in Big Bang are doing a very successful channel of TikTok for children. Little experiments for the children. That's very nice. And I think in with respect to media, to me, TikTok may be, podcast and TV series in platforms like, say, Netflix or HBO, this kind of stuff.
Well, I'll just say briefly something that I'll repeat briefly something that I've been saying all along. I think the natural inclination of scientists to work across borders and across boundaries is going to be extremely important, more important in the future even than it is now. And I think that in some cases where country communication has broken down politically, scientists will keep communicating with each other. And so I think that there might be a lot more influence in peacekeeping in the future even. I think it could be extremely more important in the future.
I'm very curious to see how the last year or so of COVID will, I'm hoping for the better, influence science communication, both from the very basic, this would not have happened if the science communication had been a tad better, and science communication had indeed influenced policy in more measurable ways, but also in ways of actually increasing access to events. So for instance, this very event here. As Donna pointed out, we have people based in 3 continents, 6 different locations, and we're able to host this discussion, and everyone is able to watch it from their house on demand, from wherever they are. So to some degree, I think we will probably adapt to technology as new platforms come out, or as new platforms become popular. There are going to be people using them, and if you want to reach that audience, then we are going to have to adapt. In terms of TikTok, I haven't dipped my toes in personally, but I have seen TikToks by science communicators, and I do think that TikTok, even though it looks very silly and very basic, I actually think to do it well, it does require quite a bit of talent. You have to have a message that you can condense into a minute or less. You have to have a message that's going to be understood by your target age group. You probably have to have some background in comedy, humor, knowing what's trendy. But in doing so, you'll probably also be able to reach quite a lot of people. Likewise, podcasts have also been on the rise, with people commuting or even just working from home, perhaps doing repetitive tasks, then being able to adapt and learn how to reach out to collaborators, how to set up a recording, best ways to make conversations engaging, or actually touch on things that people want to listen to. I feel, I was going to say the opposite. YouTube is definitely not empty in the English-speaking world. Sometimes I worry it's a bit too saturated, and sometimes I worry that, younger people coming to the internet, they turn to TikTok or Instagram or much more short-form pieces of content. So I do often wonder if the time to adapt and either turn to streaming such as Twitch or short-form content will come. But I do have hopes that long form and in-depth content will still have a place, because there will still be people who want to see in-depth analyses. So I don't know, as technology advances, options that are available will change, but I think also the options that are available increase. So there's something there for everybody.
As someone who has a TikTok, I hope that there's a future on TikTok of science communication, as I've dipped my toes into it quite a bit during the pandemic. But I think exactly what you were saying, the idea of where's the audience now? And as long as there's an audience there, there's potential for there to be science communication on that platform. I think of even Twitch has become very huge during the pandemic, and I don't know how much science communication is going on Twitch. So that's it's an untapped market, and I think there's an ability to kind of look at how could I do science communication on Twitch. I think, I've been really inspired by how TikTok, when I first downloaded TikTok, there was no science communication on there. I felt it was kind of dances and whatever. And immediately, it's just, as the months went on, I saw more and more scientists on there, just giving little, talks, or just, it's just so cool how any platform can be adapted to science communication. You just have to change your approach, right? Because TikTok is that 1-minute video. So it's how do I present as small of a point as possible that I can cover it correctly, but still make it interesting, but still have a hook, but still, have a punchline maybe, which in that way, I think TikTok is such a fun medium, because you really have to script out every single second and use it how you can.
That's great. I think we've covered quite a lot. Let's go and check some of the questions. So Roberto's asking here, I've been thinking of starting a channel on YouTube for a while, like some of the people here. What is your advice on how to do it? What do you think are the common mistakes? And is there anything you wish you knew when you started? Thank you.
I don't know, my experience in YouTube is not the standard one, because it was a company who called me to do the channel. So I'm not putting the YouTube channel by myself. But if I have to, then I think what Shannon said, that learn the technicalities first, or at least master it a little bit. It will save a lot of work. If I have to do my YouTube channels myself now, I couldn't do it. I wouldn't be able to do it because I don't know how to edit. I don't know about the sound and so on. So I think one thing to learn fast or soon is all the technicality, because it will save a lot of work, and then you can really focus on your structure, the science, or whatever you want.
Some advice I've often heard and which I stand by is expect your first videos or productions to not be great. If you do want your first videos to be really good, I would recommend just practice making videos. As Edu said, get familiar with the technicalities, get comfortable using a camera. You don't have to use, a big DSLR or video camera. You can use your phone, but practice telling stories, try things out, and basically the more things you make, the more mistakes you'll make, and then you'll be able to learn from those mistakes. And I think it's quite a common occurrence for many YouTubers, certainly for myself. When we look back at our old work, quite often we will cringe a little bit, or we'll realize certain ways about how we speak or how we framed things or how we lit things that we have become more experienced with as time goes on. So I feel like what I'm saying is be open to the fact that you'll make mistakes, and that ideally it's going to be a journey where you're going to be growing along. So don't be afraid of failure or things not taking off immediately, because it's a journey as opposed to just reaching an end goal as soon as you start making content. And then the other common mistake I think people make, and which I sometimes worry I make myself, is either just being a bit too broad in the content you create. YouTube does very well with niche content because people love I say people, I think it's really the YouTube algorithm. They really love to put you in a box. They want you to be that person who makes math videos or that person who makes videos about insects. So if you make a variety of content, you might find that people are a bit confused as to what to expect. And likewise, know your audience. It might be a very narrow audience or a broad audience, but please make sure that you're making your content for the same audience as you make things, because you're essentially making a series that you want people to come back for.
I think also one last thing to consider when you're starting a channel is, and it's a common mistake that I know I made and struggled with in the start of my science communication career, was don't read comments too seriously. Just don't take comments too seriously. Comments can be great in terms of when they're constructive, because you do want to interact with your audience. Like, your audience is important, but there is a limit. And I know, especially like being a woman online can be really difficult when you're presenting science and you're presenting yourself as a scientist. Sometimes you can get some nasty comments. If you find that that reading the comments is negative for you, don't read the comments. That's something I learned maybe a little too late, was not to read the comments for me. So yeah, and finding a community of maybe other YouTubers or something that you can relate to, in case you do come across things that are difficult in that world. It can be hard putting yourself out there online. And I don't want to not say that, but yeah, it can be difficult.
Yes, I would like to just echo what Shannon said and say the comments section under your videos is your space. You're hosting the video. That is your space and your atmosphere. There are lots of YouTubers who seem to be very against moderating their comments section or getting rid of negative comments. I actually strongly disagree with that. I really like the comment section underneath my videos to be a space for positive discussion. If there are people there who are just speaking about my appearance or sexualizing me or going off topic, then someone who might actually have something very insightful to say is going to see those comments and think, okay, she doesn't check the comments, or like this space isn't very safe, or it's not very highbrow. So it's not like a free-for-all where everyone's going to comment things. Most likely the people who have interesting discussion points to add are not going to add it to a very spammy comment section. And also likewise, your mental health is also important. And if you're the one who's managing that comment section, again, if you don't want to see something, it's fine to get rid of it, or it's fine to filter words, or it's fine to get someone else to deal with it. But I personally don't think there's any problem in making your comment section the space you want it to be. I personally always like asking questions both in the video and in the pinned comment, so then people come to the comment section inspired to answer those questions. And if I make a mistake, then I will often also correct it in the top comment as well. So there's accountability, and people will see that, you know, I also do listen to when things do go wrong, that people making videos aren't always perfect, but that it can be done so in a constructive and kind way.
So another question, this one is from Juan José Domínguez López. He's asking, when you write a stand-up size monologue, how do you make it funny for people that are not expert in the subject? Maybe for the more comedians and monologists?
It's not easy to answer short, but when you do humor, then you need to know your audience and know what are the references, because humor is a local thing always. You define local as you want, but it's always local thing, and you need to know your audience and see these connections of the science you are presenting to what your audience is living, and then there's lots of funny situations that you can compare with and use. But always, at least in my opinion, if it is a science monologue, on top of the hierarchy there is science. On the center of the focus there's the audience, and that's where the humor comes.
Yeah, I would say really like finding your own voice. Like, I think everyone has humor. It might be a little different. Like, everyone has their own personal style of humor. And so if there's a way to make that science monologue as relatable as possible, and, you know, humor is relatability. Humor is the audience saying, haha, I relate to that. Like, you got me, like I did, or it can be unexpected, you know, connections is also part of humor. So I think really think about the topic and how you think about it. And if there's a way you can make that comparison in that monologue, you know, say it. And like, sometimes like you might think it's not that funny, but just making that comparison is kind of, you know, funny. I think comparing, you know, scientific anything to anything more mundane or day to day tends to be, you know, a little humorous, because it's that unexpected clash of things. But I think finding the ways that you relate to the material, the scientific material, and, you know, what are different ways to understand this? How can I compare this to something else? Like, what does this look like? How can I heighten? There's another thing in comedy called heightening. So like, if this is true, what else is true? Those are like little techniques that you can use to kind of make things a little more interesting. It's part of storytelling, but also part of humor.
I'll also just add to that, I'm not the world's funniest person, so I feel like I do have my plot devices when I do have to add humor in ways that aren't just telling bad puns and wordplay, which are my usual preferred devices. But I usually find when it comes to science, I'll usually do things such as personalize the science. So I'll tell the funny stories that happen to me in the lab, whether they are just amusing or unexpected, such as the time I had to eat my experimental species. And then it's like, what happened there? And they want to listen to the story, but also it's a funny story. Or when you're working with flies, maybe you can anthropomorphize the flies and tell the perspective from the flies. There's, you know, a wide land of agar and a cloud of cotton wool above them. So again, you're giving a unique perspective that also puts them into place and might also be amusing to them. Obviously, it also depends on everyone's flavor of humor, or about the times that the flies I worked with didn't want to fly. So I would call them walk until they would start flying. And then another thing that I would often do, and actually this comes from a completely different area of my life, which is mental health and OCD, one of the devices I was told to do was, if I got a horrific thought, was to just hyperbolize it until it becomes ridiculous. But I've also found that using this when it comes to monologues as well, sometimes works to just hype up something that you want to talk about and make it funny. So these are maybe more highly specific points, but as someone who doesn't feel that comedy comes naturally to them, I feel like these have been very helpful to me.
Amazing. For the sake of time, just 2 more questions, because we've been going for a while. So Alonso asked us, he communicates in conference, and he also does in-live robot demonstrations with a non-technical audience. So he wants to know if you have any tips about how to adapt the content to the audience and how much attention he should pay on engaging.
Sorry, I'm talking so much. One of the nice...
I would say... Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Edu.
Okay, so I would say you can connect people with the audience. That's your mission. That's your goal, and you can do it in many ways. But I would say in 2 ways. One is keeping your audience still say and move the content. So you say, what is there in my science that can connect with the interests my people already have? What are people interested in? Love, death, football, sports, news, whatever. They are already their interests, and there's something in the science I'm going to tell that connects with that. That's moving the content, and the other direction is moving the audience. So and this is particularly well done with stories. You can tell story, a personal story, a science story, whatever, so that you arrive to a point in which you pose a question into the people's minds. So a question that they didn't have before, you now have created a question, and that's precisely what you are going to answer. So that's moving the audience. So I said these 2 movements, either moving, there's not, of course, there's not pure, it's always a mix, but one, I like to think of this in these 2 ways. One is moving the content, and the other is moving the audience towards your content.
One of the lovely things about YouTube is it actually shows you an attention graph. So it shows you where people tend to drop off your videos. And I found this very helpful when looking at my earlier videos. What do people really like? And what do people find really boring? And there were some things that were expected. I once put an equation in a video and there was a drop off. So people don't like complicated things unannounced. And then on the other hand, there were other videos which I thought were topics that I was worried people would find boring. I remember I made a whole video about electrochromic compounds, which is basically glass and other substances that change color. And I love how everyone looked instantly bored as I said that. But in the video, I started off by talking about this aeroplane and how I fell asleep on the airplane and woke up halfway through the flight on the way to the US, and it was meant to be a daytime flight, but it seemed like nighttime, and I briefly thought I was on the wrong plane, or that maybe flat earthers were correct, or that the pilot had gone rogue and was flying in the opposite direction, only to then realize that the plane had changed color. And obviously, when I realized this very interesting technology, I really wanted to find out how it worked. And that video pretty much has almost 100% watch through. Everyone who gets through the story at the beginning also wants to know how that highly technical piece of equipment works. So I think, much as Edu said, having a hook or something that connects to the audience or gives them a reason as well to want to learn more, piquing their curiosity in some way or appealing to their emotions. I often like to go the curiosity route, or this is a very absurd and strange thing, don't you want to find out what's really behind it at the end? But there are other aspects of psychology as well, as Edu said, like love, death, heavy emotions. People are often invested in those too. So I think if you make that personal connection, people are much more likely to want to pay attention, but also having occasional check-ins or things that recontextualize or personalize content halfway through your explanation also ensures that people don't start to get bored or have their attention drift elsewhere.
That's fantastic. So last question, Samira Bokhari, I hope I pronounced that correctly. She's asking us, what are your thoughts on the credibility aspects of science on various online platforms, such as YouTube, as there has been such a surplus of real information mixed with the fake news in this past year with COVID? Go for it, Ines.
I have many thoughts as well. I think people who turn to YouTube and non-peer-reviewed sources to consume news, I think people need to be wary and they shouldn't automatically believe. And I would say this about my own videos as well. You shouldn't just believe what I say because it comes out of my mouth and I have doctor in front of my name. In my case, I try to provide all of the sources to the primary literature that I've used to research a topic. So if someone wishes to verify a claim, it's very easy for them to check it out. And likewise, on the occasions that I make mistakes, because mistakes happen, or I present some science. I think I made a video on how many digits of pi we knew. I'm pretty sure the number of digits of pi we know now is higher now since I made that video. So things get updated over time. Then providing those updates in a pinned comment is my way of providing accountability and letting people find more information on the topic. But overall, I would encourage people not to just take what people say in a YouTube video as gospel. I always feel it's a bit cultish or even manipulative if someone's trying to position themselves as an expert and purposely try to alienate their audience or isolate them from actually seeking other sources. So I think the role of a communicator isn't so much, I have broken this down for you so you don't have to go search it, and more, I'm going to break this down to you so it's more understandable, but also I'm going to give you the tools so you can verify these sources when you encounter other claims in the wild on the internet, so you can actually feel like you know how to fact check something.
I agree. I think science communication that highlights the scientific process is the best type of science communication. If you can, infuse how you're talking about things with little aspects of the scientific process, whether that be like, sometimes in my own podcast, we talk about meta-analysis and systematic reviews, and so much so that my co-host even once, my co-hosts who are non-scientists, I said a meta-analysis, and I said, do you all know what that is? And at this point, they know what that is. And I just thought that was just so amazing that a non-scientist would know what a meta-analysis was. But I think, yeah, as much as you can infuse your scientific communication with the process of science of like, this is what we know, this is what this one experiment found, but, we need more research to really make, a decisive claim. Or, sometimes we can talk about the history of science. Like, we thought things were this way, but that changed once we got more knowledge. I think that is a real tool and so important in science communication because, yeah, we all are living in this era that I think sometimes we'll look towards one person to give them the answers to everything, and that can create this kind of cult-ish kind of vibe. And it's also non-scientific, right? We need a group of experts to kind of, come to a consensus and do our best to further knowledge. It's just, yeah, it's a difficult time, but I think as much as you can engage the ideas of the scientific method in your science communication, that's really helpful.
Yes, I think those of us who are already involved in this and have scientific credentials need to make certain that we display those scientific credentials so that it will be obvious that we have them, because we're going to be role models. Obviously, we care about keeping the scientific credibility high. And so, the fact that we're doing this and we're talking about the importance of doing it, and we're going to be role models and we have credentials so we can be role models, I think all of that is important, and it will definitely help to do this, I think.
Okay, cool. So this is the end, unfortunately. I must say I've had a blast today with all of you. Thank you very much, Eduardo, Inés, Shannon, and Donna. It's been fantastic. And thank you very much to the audience. I hope you can join us on our future science communication events.
Thank you. I really appreciate being included.
Thank you so much for organizing this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Great job.
Yeah, well done.
Yes, muy bien.
Thank you.
Thank you, Helena.
I hope to see you soon at some point to all of you in America.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Bye-bye.